Hi, good evening all. I think we have some problems with the network. Let's wait for a few minutes for people to log in, please. Okay. Good evening, everyone. My name is Leo Jacqueline. I'm your moderator today on our section of policy making in maternal and child healthcare. Our speaker is Samantha Luceno, the co-founder of 254 Youth Policy CAFE. She's an experienced on data and policy analyst with a Master of Arts in Economics and Bachelor of Science in Actuarial Science and Mathematics. Hey, thank you, Samantha, for coming in. We hope that all of us are going to enjoy our speaker. Back to you, Samantha. We can start the session as people are continuing to log in.
Okay, sawa. Jackie, do you have an idea of how many people we're expecting?
Okay, good evening. Okay, I must see. We are expecting around 30. So I don't know if all of them will join, but the maximum will be around 30.
Okay, sawa. Thank you. Yeah, so I think I'll put on my camera. I don't know why Zoom is unable to detect. Okay. I think I'll put on my camera. I feel like sometimes it's difficult to hear someone you can't see. I don't know whether it's just me who can't hear people I can't see. Yeah, so I think I'll put this on. But yeah, before I even put up my presentation, because I think that will interfere with like how the camera is showing, I'll introduce myself a bit more to add on to what Jackie has mentioned. So she's given you an overview of my educational history. So I did an actuarial science degree and a master's in economics from the University of Manchester. I have since then worked in government. Specifically, I worked for the Kenya Institute for Public Policy Research and Analysis, and I've also worked in international development. I'm currently working as a program associate at the Ford Foundation. But of course, this is me representing YPC. So I'm speaking in the capacity of Youth Policy Cafe, which is an initiative that I founded, and I will give you a bit of an overview about. But before I start my presentation, or as I go through my first few slides, I'd love it if as you join the call, you just pop your name, and I can see your name. So pop the county that you are currently in or representing. So if we're all in Nairobi, then pop a county that you're representing in the chat box, and also what you're currently doing as well. So what you're currently doing and your interest in this particular topic would be great in the chat box. So I'd basically love to know a bit more about you guys, even as much as I've introduced myself. I don't anticipate I'll take the entire 2 hours, but I'd like to request that you guys indulge me. Please let this be a conversation. Don't let me talk to myself. I like to have conversations with guys. This is a two-way street. There's a lot that you know about your individual counties or the areas that you're living in that I possibly don't have visibility over, considering I'm coming from a more national level like perspective. So it would be great if you share some of those thoughts, some of those challenges relating to the policy process, and even just your ideas about it as a topic. I know a lot of young people don't like to discuss policy. It seems like a bit of a drag. But yeah, hopefully after this session, I'll have convinced you why you need to get invested in policy as an area of interest. So I can see Mercy, County 47 is?
Nairobi.
Nairobi. So, Kisumu County. Yes, so I'll keep an eye on the chat box. But as we continue having conversations, please do remind me your name before you ask the question or before you comment on a particular topic. So I'll project my screen at this point. Right, so as I have mentioned, I don't know that I've shared my sound as well, but anyway, we'll know when we get there. So as I've mentioned, my name is Samantha. I am a co-founder of 254 Youth Policy Cafe. I currently sit on the advisory board, but I was the executive director in its initial years. A lot of my team may be joining this call as well. So if I see them pop up, I'll definitely loop them in as well. But briefly, what I hope to discuss with you today is give you a brief overview of YPC, how we were founded, what we envisioned we would do. I'd give you a motivation of why you should understand the policy making process. I know you've been told a lot about reproductive health, so I won't echo the sentiments of my colleagues before. I think I want to stay focused to my area of expertise. I then plan to give you a brief overview of what policy making looks like in Kenya, and then link it to what your role is in this larger system, in this larger cycle. Lastly, there's your role, but how do you follow up that whatever you say or put forward is actually taken up and put into like actual policy documents? So we'll have a conversation around that. I'd like to hear whether you guys have actually participated in any policy making process before. That would be cool to hear, and I'd love to hear your experiences on that as well. But lastly, and part of the reason I decided not to go into breaking down specific policy documents within this call, though I'm more than happy to do it if and when the need arises at a later stage, is because I felt like the approach would be more important or impactful to share during this call, and probably have follow-up calls to discuss specific documents if and when the policy requirement arises. I say this because there are so many documents, and us reviewing them all in the span of 2 hours is actually impractical. But yeah, also feel free to reach out to me. I think Katile will share my contacts with you all. Yes, so a brief overview of YPC. We were founded in 2020, and we basically exist to facilitate conversations and sharing of experiences, ideas, information, and strategies to champion youth voices in the policy-making process. A brief overview of who we are. So we all worked for government. We worked directly in public policy. So at the Kenya Institute for Public Policy Research and Analysis. We've since then transitioned into various capacities. Some of us are university lecturers. Others, like me, are working in the philanthropy space. I have a few colleagues working in consulting management. So it's a very diverse team. And we've also worked in various sectors. So health, education, social protection. My colleague Stella has worked in infrastructure. I know Boniface and Dennis have worked in agriculture. So it's a very diverse team. I think they probably picked on me to participate in this because I've done a bit more work in the health sector and in social protection. And basically, our pathways of impact are one, evidence generation. So we write blogs, do discussion papers, basically generate evidence around policy, but we are very keen to have an inclusivity lens. What that means is we're very passionate about youth inclusion, disability inclusion, women's inclusion, and looking at policies from that particular lens. And also sort of integrating the cultural components. You know, sometimes policies fail because they're blind to culture. So we try to have a lot of conversations and generate evidence around the cultural nuances that affect the policy ecosystem. The second thing we do is stakeholder engagement. So we do this through webinars mainly. So we host a lot of webinars on policy issues, relevant policy issues, and invite stakeholders from various areas. Hopefully one day we'll have something on reproductive health, and now we have a very vast set of people to invite as well for that topic. But also linked to our stakeholder engagement component, we really love to profile young people as thought leaders. So the entire team is under 35, but we noticed that in some of these fields that we work, there are not very many young people being profiled as voices. And even when there are voices, like when they are voices within boardrooms, they're not given public platforms. So for us, that's an extremely important component. So you'll notice even in the vlogs and podcasts that we do, a lot of our speakers are really of that demographic, because we would love to show that young people also have a voice and have agency within these spaces which we work in. We also have a capacity building, and we do capacity building and mentorship. So this is part of capacity building, where we support organizations like VBYI with their initiatives and support them in other ways as well. But in addition to that, we have a mentorship and coaching program where we target university students, and that is more career oriented, but with a very strong component of civic responsibility, considering we come from the policy space. So a lot of what I'm going to share with you is actually partly comprised, part of what we actually share with our mentees on the other end. So hopefully you can give us your feedback on the content as well. Yeah, so I'd like to first of all begin, as I mentioned, I want us to have a conversation. This is not just me speaking to you guys and just like turning, like sort of pushing information at you guys, because policy can be an extremely complex topic if we don't have conversations around it. But like considering you all are coming from the perspective where you're more interested in reproductive health and like specific reproductive health issues, first of all, what are your expectations of this conversation? And secondly, why do you want to understand public policy? Before I tell you why you should. Yes, and I'd love for you guys to volunteer, but I can also volunteer people if that will be faster, but I would really love for you guys to volunteer. Let me see, I start with the MC. Jackie.
Hi, to me, I think we need to understand about policy because we do majorly deal with the youths and all the organization structures. So if we think about the policy making, we'll not understand that we need to be there for some of the policies to be made. It's us, the youths, we need to share our voices and air them so that they can understand before they could make policies. The youth also need to air their voices. That's what I think I understand about policy.
Who else should I pick on? Are there men here? Ezekiel. I'm trying to be gender, what? Trying to push the equality slogan here. Ezekiel, why understand policy? Why do you think it's relevant in the grand scheme of things?
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon. I think understanding policy is very important, especially to us as youth, because we need to be engaged in policy formulation in every part and every step that the government takes, and not only government, but every other organization. So I think having a policy which is implementable is very important. Only that, us as Kenyans, we have good policies, but the biggest issue is the implementation of these policies. So I think the issue is about policy implementation, not formulation. Thank you.
Thanks, Ezekiel. I think you'll really enjoy the section of the presentation on your role as a young person in this grand scheme of things. Yes, I'll take one more comment before I say, or rather I demonstrate why I think it's important. I think we can have Marie Michelle, but I can see her mic is not reflecting. So maybe have Alice Meshach. Why understand policy?
Okay. For me, I think
what's my link ni sign in ni talk.
But things at the same time.
If there's someone who's
This is the last session with the last. It was my line. Nimetoka.
Alice, go ahead.
okay, I was saying for me, policy. I understand the policy and the policy process. Okay, majorly we as youth, for me, I can say we as youth, we majorly, I don't know.
Alice, I think we lost you. Alice? Okay, so when we get Alice back, she'll finish her thought. Alice, you're back? Okay, so yeah, so when we get her back, she'll finish her thoughts. But basically the one message I'd want to communicate to you all is that policy does not work in silos. Policy works within an ecosystem. There's so much that happens to actually deliver social change. So for us, for instance, when we're looking at maternal mortality as an indicator to show that there's progress within the policy space, there's a lot that goes into it. So even if we have all of these great initiatives, even if we have free maternity, even if we have all of these nice things, but we're not working on the issues all around it, then we still have a problem. For a very long time, in certain regions, we had issues relating to female genital mutilation, which were deeply underpinned by cultural, like sort of undertones. So social and cultural norms that simply having a policy would not sort of resolve. For a very long time, people were just not giving birth in hospitals because they didn't have confidence in healthcare providers, but also because they had a lot more confidence in their midwives at home from a cultural and social standpoint. And in that case, you see how just simply having a policy that states that you must give birth at a hospital does not work. So the first thing is, I'd like to say, while policy is extremely important, it does not work in isolation. But while it doesn't work in isolation, it is a huge part of that larger picture. Without policy, we do not have sustained change. So we can talk about all of these maternal health things. We can talk to our communities. We can spread the word as much as we want to. But when Jackie leaves or when Alice leaves, who is there to ensure that that change that was instilled in by Jackie and Alice remains? So basically what I'm trying to tell you is that your message should outlive you. So even when you leave your community, even when you leave the area that you're working with or working in, even if you transfer this information that you're getting through this amazing initiative to people around you, there needs to be a system and a structure that sort of outlives you, that goes beyond just Alice saying into sort of driving, as you guys have said, having it like in written format or having it recognized by authorities within the country. So I want to share a short video with you about how change happens so that you see how the ecosystem works together. And you'll see that policy is one part of it, but it remains an extremely important part of it. So I will play a very short video and then we can have a conversation around it after.
You are part of movements for ending gender-based violence, for sexual and reproductive health and rights, and for economic and political empowerment happening.
Can you guys hear the sound? If you can hear the sound, put your hand up or something. Can you all hear the sound? Okay, good. Okay.
All over the world. Every day, the work you do is creating social change to advance women's rights. Building movements for social change takes time. To allow for ongoing learning and ensure that we are on the right track, it is important to measure the change women's rights groups are creating. Because social change is complex, we've adapted a framework created by the organization Gender at Work called the Change Matrix to help us measure changes. The framework describes 4 domains in which gender power structures operate and are aligned along 2 axes: individual to systemic and informal to formal. These 4 domains are increased awareness and agency among women and girls, increased access to resources, services, and power for women and girls, changes in social norms and practices, influencing policies and laws. We believe that for social transformation to have the greatest impact and be sustainable, change must occur in all 4 domains. Now, let's look at examples of changes that can be captured in each space by seeing how the achievements of a women's rights group fits into them. 30 girls increased their awareness about gender-based violence as a human rights issue. 12 girls became peer educators advocating against gender-based violence. 114 more women received the type of sexual and reproductive health services they need because a new center opened in their rural community. 3 schools are implementing a new comprehensive sexuality education. People in the community are now talking about domestic violence issues publicly. Local traditional leaders now actively support women's participation in local council elections. A new law was passed to criminalize all forms of gender-based violence. Women's rights groups were invited to provide recommendations to the new draft policy on protecting women's rights to land and inheritance. You might be asking, what if I am just a small organization and I don't work in all 4 areas? Not all organizations work in all 4 areas, and no one organization creates social change alone. Rather, each one contributes in different ways to the bigger movement to advance women's rights. In order to see what our grantees achieved collectively, we organized the outcomes from all the organizations reporting to us into the Change Matrix. Based on grants awarded in 2012 through 2013, grantees reported changes in all 4 areas, and 79% of our grantees are reporting change in 2 or more areas. Thank you. By measuring your outcomes, we can better understand the progress you and other organizations are making to advance women's rights around the world.
Okay. So from that video, I just wanted you to see that for us, social change does not happen in just one linear way. So it doesn't happen by just shifting the policy. So never envision that because you've participated in a forum where like you are able to like shift a policy, then you've solved the problem. All of the other things that you have been taught come into play. So just by virtue of you having gone through this program, you have increased awareness of reproductive and reproductive maternal health rights. And you also have increased awareness on child well-being and child health. Just by virtue of you having gone through this program, then you then become an ambassador. And through you, people can have access to some of these services. You know where these services are, you know what needs people to seek out services. So you yourself become an ambassador of the information that you have gotten. But beyond that, I'm sure as you speak to people about some of the issues that you've learned, you'll start to uncover some stereotypes. You'll start to uncover, oh, we heard that if we go to so-and-so facility, this and this doesn't happen. So you'll start to unearth some of these stereotypes that you can then counter with the information that you have. But the last and really the hardest, and I hope you've noticed that even when you look at the achievements of all of those interventions, policy seems to be the smallest. The last and the hardest sometimes to accomplish is a policy shift, because motivating a policy shift can be very difficult, partly because you have to elevate something to the discussion agenda. What I mean by discussion agenda is if you think your thing on maternal health is an issue, then you have to have people having conversations around it. I really applaud Katila and her team because they have created that space where people are actually having conversations around this. So that's the first element, the discussion agenda. But how do you elevate it to the decision agenda? How do you get the person who is actually making those decisions, who is actually influencing those policies, to listen to you and think what you're saying is relevant? There are so many dynamics and components that go into that. But hopefully by the end of this program, you should have carried one or two tools that can support you in even just forming a basic set of evidence for you to elevate things into the decision agenda as well. So I want to start start by telling you guys what policy is, because sometimes people get confused about this thing called policy. Policy is a statement of government intent. So people usually think policy is this big thing with a big document and things like that. But I'm sure a lot of you are aware that there are countries where they don't even have like written constitutions. The government has just said that this is the way we're going to move in this country. And that's exactly what happened. So a public policy is a statement of government intent. I was training some parliamentarians the other day, and I was basically telling them even their manifestos are a statement of intent. So if you get into government and your manifesto said X and you are not delivering, that is a statement of government intent. It is a policy that citizens can hold you to account on. So these are all documents that you need to be very aware of. You need to be aware of your local government parliamentarians manifesto. You need to be aware of government circulars going around. You need to be aware of policy documents, regardless of what they may be, regardless of whether they are strategies or something like that. You need to be aware, especially of the ones in the health sector, because the sector is very interlinked. We don't talk about maternal health in isolation. Maternal health is affected by very many things. If you're not meeting quality standards, for instance, within the facility that you're working in, then again, you can easily give mothers infections and leave them with a lot of problems thereafter. So maternal health is not just the Linda Mama as getting access or having access to a doctor. It's everything around. So the health sector is so interlinked that you can't possibly detach. So I encourage you guys, think through all of these documents. Make sure that you have at least touched base with them at some point. But before I break down how the policy-making process in Kenya looks like, I know a lot of people confuse these two. And I want us to unpack what politics looks like, considering we're young people, trying to elevate things to the decision agenda. So I want us to discuss the intersection between politics and policy very slightly. Maybe two people can comment on this. And what I want to basically communicate to you guys is that while policy is a political process, policy itself is not politics. Policy is very objective. We can disagree on whether something is a priority, but we can't disagree that it's an issue. We can't disagree that maternal health is an issue. For me, my priority may be infrastructure, but I'm not saying maternal health is not an issue. That's why you've seen presidents come in, focus on one thing and maybe like leave out another. They were analyzing the different presidents we've had over the years. We've had Kibaki focus on education. Uhuru has focused on probably infrastructure a bit more. That doesn't mean the other areas are not issues, they were just his focus. So for us within this forum is how do we make our, like my point is how do we make our issue a priority? Even within your county governments, I'm sure you'll notice, I'm not sure where you guys are all based, and maybe you guys can tell me as you're answering my next question, what you think your governor has focused on. Because policy is like that, it is a political process. So while you're engaging in policy, you must understand the politics, not so that you become part of the politics, but so that you learn how to manipulate them in the space of policy. So the one question I'd like to ask you guys so that you're cognizant of the response even as you go into these negotiations is how do you think politics can distort policy? And someone can volunteer or I will volunteer you. And like, don't think there's no wrong or right answer. It's just from your observation. And I know Ezekiel has actually mentioned one. I think part of the reason we have issues with implementation is at the heart of it is the political angle. But curious to hear from you guys, how do you think, especially as a young person, politics can distort policy or the policy process? Let me volunteer someone. Carol. Carol? Hi, menyamaza, ama ni Juni Friday. What's happening? What's happening? Carol? Okay, Anne, can you give us an example of how policy can be distorted by politics?
Okay, I don't have a specific example, but I'd say that if a certain policy maybe kind of creates maybe a conflict of interest for a certain maybe politician because of the kind of influence that they have in the society, they might end up delaying the maybe the implementation or the taking up of a certain policy because of just that interest.
Exactly. That's a good response. Yes, so yeah, we see that happening a lot. Delayed implementation or uptake. I can give you an example very close to you guys as young people. The youth policy. We've drafted youth policies over and over and over and over again, but there's no implementation. And there's also no follow-up of the same. So that's simply an issue of lack of prioritization. We're not saying the issues within the youth policy are not accurate, but whoever is in power is just not seeing them as a priority of now. They seem to be things that can be sort of procrastinated in a sense. So her example is very accurate. Who else wants to give an example before I give you an example probably closer to home? Anyone else? Let me pick. Pauline. Any idea how politics can potentially distort policy?
Hello. Hello.
Hi.
I was thinking the same direction as the former speaker, because if you look at these politicians, you'll find that, let's say, I don't know the real process of policy making. That's the reason why I joined the actual process. So maybe some of them are involved in this process of policy making, and you'll find maybe they'll be drafting these policies to favor themselves and something like that.
Yeah. Taking up recommendations that work for them and not necessarily what is in the best interest of the general public. That's 100% another reality. Another way politics of society can distort policy is we also live in a very ageist society. And I want, like, even as you're going into conversations on policy around maternal health, have this at the back of your mind. Considering we live in an ageist society, or a society that considers basically young people speaking in front of elders almost taboo, especially on specific issues. How do we balance those dynamics as we try to push our agenda? So that's something that you always have to be aware of when you're walking into the room. And unfortunately, as a young person, it puts an additional layer of pressure on you, in a sense, in that you should go in there with your facts, go in there with your evidence, go in there at the right time and address the right person. With older people, it may pass to just go and throw out a statement and say, this is how I feel that things are being done and I don't like it. But as a young person, we really have to argue our case and justify. So you need to be aware of also those politics of society. How do politics of society affect you? With persons with disabilities, how do those politics affect them? In certain societies, they're considered they're even hidden in their houses. They're not allowed to attend some of these forums. How do those societal politics affect them? Because even as you're thinking about maternal health rights, the maternal health rights of a person with disability versus a person without disability are very different. And unfortunately, as a young person, we bear the burden of having to speak for everyone. Even as we raise our voices for ourselves to be included, we must speak for women. We must speak for persons with disability. We must speak for the elderly, because in a few years we'll be elderly and we might even be disabled, you know? So some of those dynamics need to be balanced as you're negotiating in policy. Now, what does policy in practice look like in Kenya? So when we think about policy is, it's done in many ways. So there's the policy making process, which is a cycle that I don't think I need to take you through. But what is most important is the planning process. So in terms of planning, our development blueprint that we are supposed to align to for the next, or rather when it was formed for the next 30 years, was Kenya's Vision 2030. So Kenya's Vision 2030 established a number of pillars. Within those pillars lie various issues, including health. So health falls within the social pillar of Vision 2030. But under Kenya Vision 2030, there's medium-term plans. So every 5 years, we have medium-term plans. So currently we're on medium-term plan 3, which ran from the beginning of Uhuru's presidency to now the point we are at now. So we have medium-term plans. Basically, what medium-term plans do is they lay out a framework of what is supposed to be done over the next 5 years. So it is extremely important, if and when this document is being delivered, the youth voice is there. So for instance, and why I want to really emphasize on understanding this planning process. First, if something is not in Kenya Vision 2030, it will be very difficult to include it in MTPs. If something is not in the medium-term plans, it will be very difficult to include it in the annual development plans. So as you're pushing your agenda, you need to be aware of what is in these documents so that you know in what areas and to whom you're speaking to. So medium-term plans are basically what we use to guide our 5-year sort of progressive planning and implementation of various development projects, still organized in the same way. And for you guys, with the health issue that you're dealing with, you'll be looking under the social pillar always. And under social pillar, you'll see a heading written health. That's where you should look and that's where you should focus. Make sure you have it at the back of your mind. What does this government have at the back of it in its heart for, for health sector? And make sure you're trying to align some of the things you're advocating for within those areas. The other thing that's sort of like an extract of the medium-term plans is county integrated development plans. Again, we're about to go into the development of all of these documents. Your voices need to be heard. If you have already identified issues relating to reproductive health that you want to push through those documents, your voices need to be heard at this point. We are currently developing medium-term plan 4. After medium-term plan 4 is developed, each of your counties will go into developing a county integrated development plan, which will guide the next 5 years. So you have to have it at the back of your mind that if you're not in the room over the next 7 to 8 months, whatever priorities you have may not be taken up until 2027, probably. So these are some of those documents that you must keep in mind. So beyond that, sometimes people confuse medium-term plans and manifestos. Manifestos, in a sense, are not necessarily binding. They're simply just the person coming in and saying, oh, I want to do this, I want to do the other. That's why for us in policy, we don't consider it we consider it a statement of government intent, but it is not necessarily our guiding document. But it's a document that exists that you can potentially look at. For us, our focus is the medium-term plan, which has a lot more than what is captured under the big agenda. The annual work plans. And again, why I must emphasize, you must be in the room when county integrated development plans are being developed, discussed, strategic plans for different sectors. You must be in the room for the health sector strategic plan when it's being discussed, because that will guide the next 5 years. The annual work plans will be simply an extract of the county integrated development plans with minor adaptations to context. So for instance, when COVID came, we had to develop county recovery strategies with COVID at mind. So we had planned to do this. How do we recover considering this externality happened? So you really need to be aware of these documents and have them, at least you don't have to have the whole document. It's a very bulky document, but go to the social sector, the social pillar of the medium-term plan, look at the priorities under the health sector and pick out the priorities under reproductive health rights. And in the county integrated development plans, most of them are organized by department. The department in charge of health services will have the priorities for your particular county. So make sure you've reviewed that. Make sure you've reviewed the challenges from the previous period so that you have that as ammunition as you're advocating for things to be put into the next CIDP. A lot of people, I usually ask people, have you ever attended a public participation forum in your county? People tell me no, but make sure you attend and have those interests put in, because you can't expect government to shift sort of sporadically. We wake up today and we want to shift. It's very difficult to do that because that again creates loopholes for corruption. So just be aware of these documents, where they are placed. And yeah, I think you'll be good to go from that point. The medium-term plan is under the Vision 2030 Secretariat website. I'll share that website with Katile for to circulate with the rest of you. County integrated development plans are on the Council of Governors website. So you can go and simply find your county and identify that section and pick out the priorities and start to think about which ones do you have interest in, first of all, and which ones do you have some recommendations for, and which ones do you want to now start progressively tracking. But also just to link this to the bigger picture, and these are maybe conversations that you may not be a part of, but there's the overall international development agenda. We align a lot of the things that we do to very many things. So Sustainable Development Goals, AU Agenda, EAC Agenda, Beijing Declaration, and so many other treaties and conventions that we've signed on to. So according to the Constitution, any treaty convention that we sign on to is in itself law, if that makes sense. So anything that we sign onto also becomes law. That's why you also need to be aware of foreign policy. If our government signs onto something that we don't agree with, or it does not work well for us as young people, then that in itself becomes an issue for us. So I want to sort of summarize a few things that have been captured under Medium-Term Plan 3 as priorities for the health sector. This is not an exhaustive list, of course. But under Medium-Term Plan 3, there was just overall maternal health things. So basically to ensure that our hospitals are well staffed, to ensure our hospitals are equipped for maternal services, to ensure immunization of children. There's an NCD policy as well that's an extract of the medium-term plan. You can find that on the Ministry of Health website as well. But we, as I mentioned, we don't look at health in isolation. So for us as policymakers, we think about health as an intersection of so many other things. So for us, we have a set of sectors that we call child sensitive or child, women and youth responsive sectors. So these are basically sectors that if we don't address like sort of concurrently, then things fall apart. So you can imagine, say for instance, you have a pregnant mother, but she doesn't have access to food. Are you seeing that balance? So then we start having nutrition challenges. We start having issues with anemia. We start having issues like that. Say we have water and sanitation issues. We don't have proper waste disposal. We don't have clean water coming into taps, and we have children. Then we start seeing a lot of the child health modalities coming up. We start seeing people with cholera. We start seeing people with all of those things. So all of these things sort of work hand in hand. On the social protection front, we also look at things like exposure to gender-based violence. Gender-based violence can impact a child, not just physically, but mentally, can impact a woman, not just physically, but mentally. What does that do? Like, what is the like intersectionality effect, you know, of having all of those sectors work together? So while you may not have to necessarily look into these sectors, I encourage you to look into them, because I emphasize maternal health and child health on their own don't work in isolation. There are so many other factors that could make or break the effectiveness of a policy. But just to shed light on a few other areas that are prioritized beyond just simple, I know there's a target specifically to increase like, what's it called? I'm forgetting the actual terminology, but mothers who are actually giving birth from hospitals to a particular point. But in terms of social health protection, we're thinking about something like the Linda Mama project. So it was envisioned to cover 1.36 million mothers by the end of the period. So that's an intervention that even you guys within your counties can start to look. Are people complaining that they can't access maternal health services? Why can't they access them? Do they not know where to register for this particular intervention? Are they registering? Yes, but they're getting frustrated by the health facility. So that's something that you guys can start to look at. In terms of health infrastructure, there was a plan to expand infrastructure, especially at county level, in multiple hospitals, both national level hospitals and county level hospitals. So that's something that you can look at in your communities. Are you going to dispensaries? Are you going to level 4, level 5 hospitals, and you're finding that you don't have equipment to do one thing or the other? A third, and something that you'll hear a lot of people talking about, is community health volunteers. So you'll hear a lot of counties, I think we're talking to them yesterday, and they've established a sort of framework to see how community health volunteers can even support with maternal health. So do you have community health volunteers? Who are these community health volunteers? Do they understand the issues that you guys are dealing with? Are you guys community health volunteers? We did a survey some time back, and we found that almost 80% of community health volunteers are elderly people. And on the flip side, younger people were not open enough with elderly people to discuss issues of reproductive health, including maternal health issues. So what does that mean? Are you then going to leave this point and potentially become a community health volunteer? What do those community health units look like in your county? Yes, so broadly, those are a few areas, but again, I can't talk through all the things that were committed to under MTP3. But I think I urge you all to definitely look into some of those documents, understand some of the priorities, and even go granular into your county. And I couldn't go into counties because, again, there are 47 counties. I don't think there's use in doing that. But if I was to give examples of interventions that have been done in some counties, I know Kakamega was really big on pushing the Linda Mama initiative. And they did a really good job at actually bringing mothers to deliver at sort of in facilities. There are some counties in the northern part where births in hospitals were not exactly encouraged, that even started to install midwife centers within the health facility. because they understood the socio-cultural dynamics of those regions. So they understood that, granted, we can't but we can train midwives so that they are also qualified enough to give the proper sort of maternal health services to the different people that they'll get, including those who have undergone female genital mutilation. Again, these midwives were stationed very close to the actual hospital to allow for, if anything went wrong during the delivery process, they were able to transition into an actual health facility. So there are different initiatives that have happened in counties. I'd love to hear about the initiatives you've observed in your personal counties, but I'm curious to pick your minds on some of the initiatives I've mentioned. What have you observed in terms of challenges within your county?
Where did God?
Where?
Where
Do I volunteer someone? Frederick. Frederick? Or, who is willing to say something? Mary? Teresa, go ahead.
Okay, so with regard to the social health protection, at least I've seen the Linda Mama project being implemented. It's actually in use. And I actually had a question. So I don't know if I should ask now or wait.
Go ahead.
Okay, so with regard to, it's a question and also like a point with regard to health infrastructure. How do you go about, because you can't compare the resources we have in Nairobi with the resources in like areas like Wajir, Mandera, like Turkana. You can't compare the resources. One is more equipped than the other. So how do you guys go about the health infrastructure when it comes to policies and trying to implement the policies that you have in place?
Health infrastructure is actually like a pretty tricky one in that it's majorly domiciled at national level. So ideally, whatever the national government gets for infrastructure should be subdivided somehow throughout the counties. You find instances where the county does have something small that they can use to intervene. I know in Mombasa, in some sub-counties, the county government has actually intervened at dispensary level to sort of enhance the infrastructure, but that's usually a very tricky one. The best that you can do is create visibility of the issue. At county level, what then your role would be is to tell the county government, this is what you're reporting to national government that we require as Nairobi County. But in fact, this is the gap. Or we've noticed that in X and X and X facilities, you're saying that you're funding a youth center, for instance, but we are not seeing the actual youth center, or the youth center has nothing in it, you know? So your role would actually be to point out that gap so that as the next budgeting cycle is coming in, they are aware of some of those dynamics. Yeah, but like I think like, and I was actually going to talk about it next, the aspect of devolution and how that then plays out in terms of how we advocate for certain elements. Have I answered your question?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, but also to take you a bit further into into like other policy dynamics that come with that for a very long time, because like eventually the idea is all these functions should be devolved to the counties, eventually, progressively. So the idea is that the national government is sort of holding them in trust. And so we've been doing a lot of work around how do we create spaces that counties can actually generate these revenues. So you're right, Teresa, in saying that those counties don't have as much. Part of the reason is because of own source revenue. So own source revenue is basically of a county is basically the money they get from like licenses, what's it called, parking, all of those things. So you'll find that, as you're saying rightfully, in Nairobi, there's a lot of that happening. So there's a lot of businesses, there's a lot of, you know, like they're charging us crazy amounts to park in town and all of that. So all of that money then goes into the budget and sort of supplements or complements what they have. That remains a challenge because the counties that then don't have as much discretion. So it's definitely an issue. Is there another question or comment? Let me pick on someone else. Millicent, where you are? So my question was, I'm curious whether you've observed any of these initiatives being implemented in your counties. What challenges have you observed?
I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. We can.
Yeah. So some of them been implemented, but the challenge has been it's been hard to like fully implement them because there's a part that does not favor the leader side, and it is taking quite some time to fully implement them. But I kind of feel like also the citizens are looking at it from a different perspective. People are starting to hold our leaders accountable because even right now the campaigns, the question is, you promised to do this and you've not accomplished. Why is this still waited? So I feel like our citizens have started to realize that we need to hold them accountable.
Yeah. Like I think for me, we can write all these nice policy documents, and I think the beauty of a policy document, as I was saying, is it gives you a reason to argue, like it gives you a justification. So if, for instance, as a young person, like in terms of maybe maternal health, what you managed to push and get incorporated into like a policy document was a commitment that you would maybe increase the number of theaters or something within the facilities within maybe our county. Maybe that's what you managed to push and you accomplished, and that is actually written down. It gives you a framework to go back and say, you documented this as a commitment. You know, sometimes these verbal commitments, yes, we, we can throw them out the window, but when something is documented on a policy document or a shift in budget has been made, then we have merit and we have basis to hold people accountable. So as young people, and being 70, almost, those under 35 are 75% of Kenya's population, then we can actually hold some of these leaders to account. Yes, and I say this to say that even policies have their challenges in terms of implementation. I know with Linda Mama, while it seems to be working in some areas, it has worked best in areas where there's been sort of like a top-down acknowledgement of its importance. So for instance, I'm not sure whether it's Makueni or Kitui, one of the two, where there was already governor interest in pushing access to maternal health as an issue. That seems to have picked up a lot faster. In Kakamega, it seems to have picked up a lot faster. In other areas, it may not have picked up as much or as fast. But also there's the issue of access to information. Do people know that this service exists? If they know, do they know how to register? Do they know how to access the service? So I worked briefly for the National Hospital Insurance Fund. And unfortunately, if you don't register, then it's difficult to plan for you in terms of antenatal care and, and even the delivery itself. So then how do we manage that? How do we increase access to information on the initiatives that already exist and are working, while pushing for accountability on things that are probably sort of wayward and not, not working. Or even like things that I've heard of are quality of services. Sometimes Linda Mama is working, but you go to the hospital and the nurse is so rude to you, you want to run away. So those dynamics, how do we hold our systems and our structures accountable, even when policy documents exist? So for me, like when I think about what then our role in the ecosystem then becomes, is that accountability role. It's to understand what the policy documents say and then hold government to account on their commitments. So, yes, so the next thing I wanted to sort of just mention, but mention in passing, is we must also remember that health sector is devolved. And I know I'm not talking about maternal health, but maternal health is a baby of the health sector. And as I mentioned, I strongly believe the health sector in its entirety is very interconnected. But yes, so health sector is devolved. But for me, I think the greatest impact is at county level. The greatest potential for pushing for accountability is at county level. And I believe it'll then sort of spill over into national level in a sense. But to give you a description of what the Constitution says is the mandate of the county government. So the county is first of all supposed to, is in charge of certain health facilities and pharmacies. National government is also in charge of certain health facilities and pharmacies. So you'll find that in some counties, there's a national level hospital. That is under the docket of the national government. But there's majority of your facilities which will fall under the county governments. When you go to some of these pharmacies and you find that they don't have medicine, that again is the mandate of the county government to budget for and ensure they're able to predict what the population will require in the next cycle. Then we have ambulance services. That's fairly straightforward. Promotion of primary health again is straightforward. One that I'm not seeing here is surveillance. Is another thing. Disease surveillance is another thing. So it's again the role of the county government to understand the challenges of the community. So for instance, thinking about maternal health, if you're finding a lot of mothers are leaving hospitals with infections, when you're speaking to them at community level, that information is important for disease surveillance. And you are actually allowed to channel that information to the county government so that they're aware of what is happening in the community. They also do certain small infrastructure projects, vaccination of children, antenatal care. Again, that's majorly under Linda Mama at the moment, which is being handled more or less at national level because it's a social protection initiative. But to give an example, for instance, is Linda Mama as a project is handled at national level because it's a social protection initiative, meaning it's domiciled in the State Department it's domiciled under health, but it's a national level priority considering it's a social protection initiative. Social protection is in essence not supposed to be done by county government. So the budget for that comes from the national government. So you may not necessarily be able to hold the county government accountable that people are not able to access Linda Mama, but you can hold them accountable on the quality of service that they got when they went and accessed the service. So you can go, if like say for instance, someone had a Linda Mama card and they went to hospital and they maybe didn't get timely care. The nurse was rude to them. They came out with an infection. So one of their underlying conditions was not taken into consideration and they were given the wrong treatment. You can hold the county government to account on that and raise that as an issue, especially if it's like sort of something that's fairly prevalent. I'll think of a few other examples as we go along and then I can share them with you. But another thing that more and more county governments have started doing is developing context-specific policies. Granted, the policy mantle is within the national government, but a lot of counties are understanding that health is a very case-specific issue. When we are, like, say, when you're in Mombasa, the challenges you're facing in Mombasa are very different from the challenges someone else is facing in Nairobi versus the challenges someone else is facing in Vihiga. So health in itself is a very context-specific issue, and it needs to be handled as such. So more and more counties are coming up with documents. So like, for instance, I know Mombasa has recently come up with an adolescent reproductive health policy of sorts. While there's a national policy, which may be the Bible in a sense of the policy documents, there's also a local one, which speaks to certain issues that inform how they feed into the national policy. So again, you need to be vigilant and be aware of the department. So Department of Health Services will potentially put out calls for participation on some of these documents. Those are places and spaces that you should find a way to get into. Yeah, so on the whole accountability thing, and I want to again emphasize that the starting point is I must know what is in the document. I must understand what my county priorities are. I mean, Katila has my contacts and the rest of my team's contacts. If you're potentially thinking of holding your county government to account and you would like to unpack the CIDP with us, or you'd like to unpack another national level policy with us, we're happy to sit down and think through that process with you. Because again, all of these documents are very different and point to very specific and different priorities. And so we're happy to do that. So the first step is you must understand the documents. If you don't understand the documents, then you sort of get lost in advocating for the wrong thing, or you start advocating for something that is already being implemented in one way or another, while your role really should have been to strengthen whatever is already happening. So my assignment to you guys, take time, interrogate the documents. If you need support, breaking them down into like palatable, smaller pieces, happy to support with that. Or I'm sure Katile may have gone through some of those documents as well. So get as much help as you can. And then we go into holding the government to account. So I gave it some thought, and I thought of things or initiatives that had worked in terms of holding governments to account. And this is one I thought would be potentially very promising for you all to take up and try and drive in your local communities. So I'd like to again share another video for a few minutes, and then we can reflect on and we can reflect on it.
The Community Scorecard is a process that empowers individuals and communities to evaluate local service delivery issues and effect desired change within their own community. Community members, service providers, and local government officials unite to discuss these issues and generate and implement solutions to barriers they identify. The process has been used to improve sanitation, education, agriculture, and healthcare services. The scorecard kicks off with planning and preparation. A team initiates communication with local stakeholders to establish a base of support for the process. As the team develops deeper understanding of the local context, they are able to select sites to execute the scorecard and groups with which to work. The scorecard is used to identify barriers that keep people from accessing services. Community focus groups identify issues, which are then organized into themes. A measurable indicator is developed for each theme. Each indicator is scored by the community. The community also indicates reasons for why a particular score was given and creates suggestions for improvement. The same scorecard process is conducted with service providers. They identify issues, develop and score indicators, and make suggestions for improvement. The scorecard comes to life at the interface meeting. Community members, service providers, and local government officials discuss their respective scorecards, issues, and priorities. This joint conversation gives way to locally identified solutions and a community action plan. Once the action plan is established, the implementation of solutions begins. The group's actions after the scorecard process are monitored and improvements are evaluated to ensure change. The entire process is repeated every 6 months to create accountability to the action plans. This leads to consistent and sustainable growth within the community.
Okay. So the scorecard approach is something that has been used in a number of countries and has actually been found to be quite effective. I'll give you an example of where it has been used in Kenya. I know there are some youth organizations that used it in 2 sub-counties in Mombasa. And when they used it, of course, their focus was youth-friendly centers and family planning. But when they used it, they got a number of youth centers established. They actually had members of staff actually retrenched or fired or relocated from facilities that they were working in on the basis that they were not as friendly with younger audiences. They got ramps installed, like thinking about people with disability, they got ramps installed in multiple facilities. They got increases in budgets on account of this, of just simply sitting down with communities and saying, okay, now our issue is maternal health. What are you saying your issues are? Are you saying that the services that you're getting are not right? What are you saying the issues are? Speaking to the service providers, understanding their constraints, then bringing those 2 people together, having them sit down, discuss, and understand perspectives of both sides, including government. And in that case, because of the evidence that was provided to government then became an enabler and actually started inviting these young people to speak at different public participation forums and educate them on the needs of the young people within those communities. So I give this example to mean that we may not be directly involved when the idea is being generated, but we can be watchdogs of the idea. So if within maternal and child healthcare, we understand that a policy initiative is supposed to happen, we were aiming for 100% immunization. We understand that that is supposed to happen. But when we go into our communities, we're finding that there's a disconnect. We're not getting to the levels that we initially anticipated that we would get to. It then becomes our role as citizens to step in and say, okay, fine, how do we draw this bridge? How does the government sit down with us and understand what our challenges are or what challenges we're facing? How do we also listen to our service providers? Because your health service providers also have constraints within which they're working with. Maybe they're understaffed or something like that is happening. And then how do we then bring government into the loop? 2 of your best liaison people in the context of reproductive health would be whoever is in charge of the Department of Health Services, and also whoever is in charge of youth services, whoever in the county is in charge of youth relations and things like that. Those would be a vital entry point for you. And for the most part, I think at county level, shifts happen when rightly targeted. We've worked with quite a number of counties and we've seen that shifts can happen when rightly targeted, when the intervention was happening at the right point in time. Yes, so I don't know whether anyone has any questions on and just to briefly summarize this community scorecard initiative, the idea behind it is you guys have a topic, maternal and reproductive health rights, and you have childcare rights. That's already your area of focus. Start to build out a basis of evidence, a batch of evidence that you can use to elevate issues to the decision agenda. Because a lot of people will not listen to you with hearsay. So if you just go and you're telling Samantha, who's sitting in a government office, listen, people are not accessing government services, but me, I have my data that is showing me that government services are being accessed. Unless I understand, unless I have evidence to understand where you're coming from, most times I may not take your considerations into account. So evidence really helps, and this can support you build that sort of evidence. Build that evidence from the community level. Building it from the community level, again, gives you numbers. One of the components that we look at when we are thinking about an issue being elevated into the decision agenda. So for a thing, when I say decision agenda, it's an issue that is so vast that we must do something about it. So for things to be elevated to the decision agenda, there's a component of numbers. Are enough people saying that this is an issue? Or is it just Millicent saying that it's an issue? Are enough people saying that our children are not getting immunized, yet there's a whole thing that is supposed to be happening around immunization? And we have seen that in the budgets, X amount is being allocated to immunization, but almost everyone here hasn't been immunized. People will not hear when you are just coming at it from like an anecdotal perspective, but if you have the data and you've spoken to people, you have the numbers. So I think those are certain things that you can also use to try and influence your decision, and they're fairly easy things to run within your local communities. Again, something that I'm potentially more than happy to do, if you decide you want to do something similar to this in your community, reach out to me. I will see how best to support you, get a contact within government to support you. So the idea is that, again, build a bridge between government and the community, where you are the voice of the community with evidence, but government is also listening to you and bringing you to the room and to the table. Hiya. So then the question here then becomes, how do we follow up? So if you have a community scorecard, you found that this is the action plan that you've come up with, you wanted X issues addressed in the next 6 months or 1 year or whatever, then how then do we follow up? I think, like for me, I think this is a loophole, but it's also an entry point for me. The Constitution requires public participation. It's espoused as a national value. State agencies are expected to abide by it. So it's also a very serious offense if you say that you are not engaged effectively. So that for us is an entry point. And for these, for a lot of government institutions, they're required to do this whenever we are doing something related to the Constitution, or whenever they're doing something related to interpreting the law, or whenever they're even implementing public policy or even monitoring it, they're required to engage the public in one way or another. Here is now the gap, or here is where the issue is. Someone will plan a public participation forum and stick the notice in just a very strange place where people will never see it. Or those things of, I'm doing public participation, but I'm not inviting you I'm inviting you, but I'm not inviting you. One of those things. So like, for instance, if you put it at a place where young people will never visit, I don't know what place that is. I don't know, where do young people never visit? I don't know, I can't think of an example. But if you put it, say, in the county government office on the wall, that there's a public participation forum in 3 weeks, guys will never see, they will never know that anything is happening. And that in itself dilutes the effectiveness. It then means that we need to take we need to do a bit more to harvest this information and to be abreast with the goings on. But if at all we do then get engaged, it's a huge opportunity for us to get our information in. One process I would really love you guys to be cognizant of and engage with effectively. One of our colleagues has talked about implementation being the challenge. Why does implementation always fail? In policy, we say the truest expression of intent is budget. You can write 1,000,001 documents, and nice documents, and we have them. An example I gave you guys is the youth policy. We have those documents, but are the budgets following those documents? So you can go there, complain, get your thing written down, and then you get to your budget and you're completely left out of the budgeting process. It's completely left out of the budget. So the budgets are things that we need to be extremely vigilant about. So we budget in one way. So the first way is the medium-term expenditure frameworks. So it's like a 3-year budget where, like, say, for instance, the health sector will come and say, we anticipate that for the next 3 years, we'll probably need recurrent expenditure of X amount. We intend on, and again, aligned to the strategic plans, county integrated development plans. This is where the catch is. All of those things are so interlinked. So like, say, for instance, the health sector will say, we have a health sector strategic plan for the period 2017 to 2022. These are the things we want to do. we think we'll need X number of staff, or we'll need to increase our health workers by X amount, we'll need to do this by X amount, and these are the budgets that we're projecting. A lot of the times, the sabotage is in the nitty-gritties. So like, for instance, we have a budget line for maternal health, but we have not ring-fenced, or rather we have not said we can't reprioritize. So the money for maternal health comes, but we get midway and we say, NCDs here are many. We remove that money from maternal health and we put it under NCDs. So it's those kind of two gaps in the budget that you need to be aware of and you need to look into as you're reviewing budgets. This is another thing that is fairly technical. So if you need support on that, again, I believe Katila should share my contacts and the contacts of my teammates. And we'll work out modalities on how to support you in breaking that down. But budgets are, for me, the truest intent of prioritization. If you tell me you're going to do maternal health, but your budgets are not reflecting that, I think that's a very huge gap. And that's how we end up with a lot of policies that go unimplemented in this country, because the truest intent is not met. And this is just a breakdown of the budgeting cycle that I wanted you guys to be aware of. And I hope you see the intersectionality or interconnectedness between the policy documents and the budgeting cycle. So around August, a circular is issued to MDAs and counties by the Treasury to start thinking through their annual development plans and budgets. In September, county annual development plans are prepared and tabled to county assembly. So you can imagine, again, why your county assembly is important even as we go into the elections. Because if they don't have your priorities at heart, they can shoot it down at this point. In September to October, development of budgets and approval by cabinet. These budgets are developed on the backdrop of annual development plans. They're not developed out of anywhere. So if these annual development plans don't have your issues, don't expect you'll come there in December and you're trying to push for an agenda. That agenda will have to be implemented in the next budgeting cycle. Then this is basically how the outline looks like. So around May, you'll have public hearings. At this point would be your point to potentially intervene in a lot of these conversations. And at the end of the financial year is June. So I'll share this calendar with you. Why I want you to be aware of this is the calls will come around this time. So for the ADPs, your calls may come around August or earlier than August, maybe, to have conversations around what's integrated. And some counties are actually doing this. I'm not sure whether all counties are doing it, but I know some counties are actually doing it. With the budgets, I also know counties are doing it. The gap here becomes either they don't share the document in advance, which again becomes an area for you to push for. So if you notice that there's a call for participation in a budget review and you have never even seen the budget, then what are you going to review? You can't go there and sit down and listen to guys. So make sure that if you notice such two issues here and there, point them out. I'll mention to you that part of the reason these issues exist is while public participation is espoused as a value within the Constitution and is something that we should do, we've been trying to put in place a framework for what it actually looks like for a very long time and have not been able to. So there's a public participation bill which has, again, not been passed for a very long time. I don't know whether that's a factor of goodwill or I don't know what that is a factor of, but just be aware of these gaps existing and then try and, circumnavigate them in a sense. So if, for instance, you notice the budget is not out, reach out, ask for the budget document. They'll potentially send you a very user-unfriendly budget. Send it to us, we'll interrogate it for you in the specific lines that you want to point to. Yeah. But broadly speaking, before I close off, I'd just like to give you a few tips on how to effectively engage in these forums. The first is make sure that you're following your local government and the Ministry of Health on social media. As young people, we follow a lot of people apart from government. So make sure you're following these guys. A lot of the time, they'll post some of those calls on their Twitter handles or something like that. And that's an opportunity for you to engage. The second is take time to interrogate the relevant ministry website and the relevant county government websites. I will tell you for a fact that information is hidden in plain sight, if so to speak. Some of these websites are very confusing and you'll never know where to get what if you don't try and internalize like the website and how it looks and where things are. So make sure you take time to interrogate the website. If you can't understand it, reach out to a county official and ask them for support in interrogating it. Where I can support, I would be more than happy to support. Of course, these websites are very different across county governments. None of them are ever the same. But yes, take time to interrogate some of these things. Take time to interrogate some of these things. The third, and I think something that I've emphasized probably throughout this meeting, is look for support. Look for support. A lot of these things are extremely technical. The budgets are technical. If I actually give you a policy document today, it'll actually be like 50 pages long. If I give you a sector report, because health sector, for instance, puts forward like sector reports, reviewing the previous cycle, saying where their challenges were, saying why they're projecting what they're projecting. If I give you a sector report, it might throw you off by simply how it looks and the size of it all. But there are so many of us organizations working in this space who would be more than happy and willing to support you interrogate these documents. So definitely reach out. At times, because what we found to work with governments is documentation, you may even have to write a policy memo. Do you know how to write that? That's again something that we can support you thinking through how to write so that you're able to at least use this policy memo as evidence that you communicated something with government and that you can use this then to follow up. That I've sort of emphasized, take time to review the documents as well. Never go for a public participation forum and you started looking at the documents 30 minutes before the forum. It will not work. Take time to review the documents, internalize them, seek out different opinions. Maybe something in the document is not too clear, but the information is somewhere else. Seek out different opinions about this document. Make sure that by the time you're actually going to present an opinion, it's a valid opinion that is founded on some sort of grounds. And the last, but the most important is understand where the responsibility lies. Whenever you're talking about policy with anyone, understand where the responsibility lies. Who is in charge of this area? Make sure you've done your research to understand, okay, if I'm talking about this issue, this is an issue that is related to a particular person within the Department of Health Services. Am I directing this question to this person? If I'm talking about like that question on infrastructure, like should I be talking to the national government? Should I be talking to the county government? If I'm talking to the county government, how do I frame it with the county government? All of those dynamics. Yeah. And I think like for me, if you don't remember anything else that I've said, I want you guys to understand where you intervene really matters and how you intervene matters. If you intervene in the wrong way, it will probably not be taken up. If you intervene and speak to the wrong person, it will not be taken up. So where, how, all of those things, all of those dynamics of how you intervene really matter. And that's why I continue to emphasize, definitely seek out help. If you don't understand like how the dynamics of your county work, there's someone who understands. Let them help you understand those dynamics. Eventually, even you will become a professional at, managing those dynamics, but it takes a while to sort of get used to. So you need to also give yourself that grace to learn and understand the dynamics of your county or your different sector that you want to influence. Yes, and these are just like a set of documents that I think that could be interesting for you to begin reviewing, and the links. So I can share this presentation with the BBYI team and they can share that with you all. Yes, and that brings me to the end of my presentation. So Jackie, Jackie, over to you. And in case there are any questions, do feel free to ask them at this point.
Thank you, Samantha. Anyone with question, please, you can raise it. At Alice, please, the contact for Samantha will be shared, I think, with Katile. So you'll get it after this.
Jackie, just popped it in the chat.
Okay. Matthew, do you have anything to say before I finish?
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Samantha, for the interactive session. Okay, for sharing on policy making, there are a lot of questions on policy making. We usually see the policies being passed, but we have never seen them implemented. So it's been an insight, but we have known how we can chip in and help the government to implement those policies. And in case we see any loopholes, we can reach out and be helped. Thank you so much. I know you'll get a lot of questions, you get a lot of interactions from everyone who is interested in policy advocacy and anything to do with SRH advocacy. Thank you. For the members, okay, on Wednesday, we'll be having the group presentations. I expect all of you to send me your presentations, your group presentation on my email on Monday. Then on Wednesday, we'll present them prior. Okay, our graduation will be on 26th on Sunday. We'll have a an online graduation. Then afterwards, on mid-July, we'll have a physical activity that will be inclusive of everyone from cohort 1, cohort 2, and the BBY members. Will communicate the venue. But we'll like to have suggestions from you on WhatsApp on where do you think we can have a physical activity. Yeah, thank you. That's all that I had today. Thank you so much. Have a blessed night.
Thank you, Mercy. I would like to express my gratitude to Ms. Samantha. Thank you so much for your evening, for your time, for giving us the insightful session today. It was really nice for us to learn more on the policy making. At least we have understood today that we as the youths, we are part of the decision making when it comes to policy. Thank you so much. And to our participants, I would really like to thank you for taking your time to attend this training. And today is our last session. I would really like to congratulate all those who are going to graduate. Congratulations to you guys. And this is not the end. Please, those who will finish, join BBY. We are still growing and we need more and more people on board. I'll also like to thank my team, the BBY team, Mercy, Katile, and the rest of the guys who made this a successful training of BHMC cohort 2. We're really happy. Some of us belong to the cohort 1, and we are happy again we joined the cohort 2 as the moderators. And we will also be happy if we will join the cohort 3 again. Thank you so much, all of you. And to our governor, we also thank you for being part of us also. And I don't have much to say. Guys, bye, and let's have a lovely evening.
Okay.